There's a lot of things going on today. I'm John C. Dvorak.
It's Crackpot and Buzzkill in the morning.
Well timed, well prepared as always. Very impressed. Very, very good.
It says Super Bowl Sunday.
It's Groundhog Day. It's all these things. It's everything. Woohoo! That's right. Oh, my goodness. How you doing?
I'm doing better than the Chinese.
Yeah. Chinese everywhere. There's, Christina was telling me that in the Netherlands, everyone, if you see Chinese walking around, or anyone with a surgical mask for that matter, walk around them. There's a lot of the French Asians are saying that they're being racially profiled, carrying signs "Je suis non pas un virus." Signs like I'm not a virus. People can be so cruel.
This came up at the dinner table conversation. Apparently, JC dug deep into the whole thing and found some interesting little factoids here that may be something people can at least discuss.
Before we start, we have a small conundrum. We need a quick sidebar for a production meeting. I have not one, not two, not three, but 4 Wuhan flu jingles to choose from for the segment, and I think we might as well listen to all of them just so we understand.
Okay, but first I want to voice my objection. Hello?
I'm listening. I'm how you said you want to voice your objection. I'm listening.
I was in agreement with the idea of calling it the Wuhan flu, but since it's not an influenza virus per se, it's a misnomer, and I don't like to promote such things, and so I've gone back into calling it the coronavirus.
Well, good. You can do that.
Everybody was kung flu fighting, and all in Wuhan dying. And it was a little bit frightening.
So that's the Kung Flu fighting from Sir Chris. Sadly, no one picked up on your objection of coronavirus.
I got myself a case of Wuhan flu. I don't know what I am supposed to do. Didn't know I had it when I gave it to you. Now we all got the Wuhan flu.
All right, so we got that one. The Wuhan flu seemed to be a popular phrase. And the last candidate.
It's time now for another Wuhan flu update.
Paid for by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
All right.
All right, so I have some feelings about these. The fourth one was clearly racist.
Yeah.
So I think that could be dropped. The second one I like the best.
The second one,
George Thorogood clone.
No, not George Thorogood. It's Bob Seger.
Bob Seger.
Yes.
George Thorogood, Bob Seger, pretty similar.
Okay.
But that one I like the best. The first one I think had the most potential, but it didn't have enough snapping sounds and other kind of sound effects.
Yeah, you need a quack, quack, quack. So this is the one. That's the one you like, right?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, good. Old time Wuhan flu. Yes. Now, is this the research paper that's been floating around? Is that what Buzzkill Jr. looked into with the inserted 4 HIV-like,
no,
whatever they're called, proteins?
No.
Oh, okay.
He's looking at some other. He started looking at ethnocentric data regarding disease vectors. And noted
he's such an exciting man to hang around.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah, to me too. I'm just saying.
So he found that there was a number of papers written. He's actually listed on one of them because he was so insistent on some of this stuff that he's been uncovering, which is that it looks as if, and this is just preliminary. I kept telling him to write it up. I'll write it up if he doesn't want to do it. And I'd like to see some more evidence of this, but I'm just going to tell you the preliminary look at this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of evidence that coronavirus in particular is more susceptible by Chinese than by Caucasians because of the same.
Yes, I've seen this.
The same phenomenon that makes it so Chinese can smoke a lot. There's a couple of cells in the lungs that are good for fixing lung damage. Those same cells are the ones that the coronavirus attaches itself to.
Yes.
And it tends to be not just Chinese, though, which makes it interesting.
No, also Japanese, I think.
Well, some Japanese, but the main target is Han Chinese.
Wow, that's pretty specific. You could not get any specific.
Uyghurs, and he traces a couple of interesting tidbits with SARS in 2002, 2003, when SARS was out. Of all places, I will call it shithole countries in the world, right next to China, namely Indonesia, there were no deaths there.
Right.
And all the cases of deaths in North America were centered around Toronto in a specific part of Chinatown.
Yeah, there's in the show notes I have an actual list that shows the susceptibility by ethnicity, I guess. What do you call it? Ethnicity, race? No, ethnicity, I think. And the U.S., U.S. is down at 50% or something compared to a lot of Asian countries. What I'm still waiting to find out is, will this spread from the Chinese all over Africa? Will it spread to Africans?
According to JC's research, the Africans, not American Afro-Americans.
No, the actual Africans.
Real Africans apparently have, a lot of them have this same structure in the lungs that will create a problem in Africa, which brings us right back to what he noticed, and this is what I'm trying to talk about. What he knows is that if you start looking into epidemiology, you find very little correlation with ethnocentric groups. They just they decided not to make the connections. So you can't tell, for example, with, let's say, the last influenza or even swine flu, you can't tell if certain blacks got it more than certain whites, or Irish got it more than Spanish or anything, because they've kept all that data out of the epidemiological studies. And that's what he found fascinating. And I proposed that the reason they did this is because, one, they don't want to give anybody any ideas.
Yeah.
And two, I think they've already targeted races with certain kinds of potentially bioengineered viruses or other complexes, AIDS, Ebola, a couple of examples. And so they don't want to show any they don't want to make these connections. So they just won't study it. But he's convinced it's Han Chinese. That's why the Chinese are so freaked out at the moment.
Right. And we have all kinds of measures being taken now. We had additional country bans. And to me, it reads like the one road, one belt strategy layout. It's like, okay, you're banned, and you're banned, and you're banned, and you're banned, which immediately, of course, I don't think it really worked. They tried to spin it as Muslim ban. No, not really. This is mainly
more Muslim ban.
Well, those people, yeah, sure, they may have Chinese in there by the hundreds of thousands who could be carrying the flu and spreading it to people who would come to America. But let's just say it's about Muslims because Trump hates Muslims. It's such a disservice to the public. The economic impact, I think, is going to be, as I was talking about from day one, this is what it's about in my mind. And the CBC so far is the only one that's had any kind of decent report on the economic impact of the coronavirus Wuhan Kung flu.
You need not look far to see the economic consequences of this virus. Airline after airline suspending flights to China. This afternoon, one of Air Canada's last direct flights from Beijing landed in Vancouver. In China, entire swaths of the country have been shut down. Starbucks has closed more than half its outlets. Toyota announced it will close its plants, and Google says it will temporarily close all of its Chinese offices. Remember, though, back in 2003, China was basically the world's factory. Today, China's much more intertwined in the buying and selling of the global economy.
The fact that the Chinese authorities have clamped down and they've put many cities in lockdown already, that means those consumers aren't out there purchasing, and that will really dampen Chinese growth.
And that dampening will be felt in places you may not expect. Cameron Seafood sells about half its lobsters to China. And Chinese New Year is one of the busiest times of year. They were set to ship about 20,000 pounds this week.
Those orders all cancelled. so actually the sales to China completely disappeared from Monday.
There are other markets for those lobsters, but there's no way to make up the loss of the Chinese market. And no way of knowing how or when the world's second biggest economy will reopen for business.
If it really is, and of course this sounds completely bioengineered, how unfortunate for these Chinese that it seems to be targeting them. But it's kind of a perfect setup. I mean, who's the old coot Secretary of Commerce? Wilbur. What's his name? Wilbur
Ross.
Yeah, Wilbur Ross. He said, this is good. He made a statement that this is really good because now we can bring back some of that manufacturing. This guy always lets the cat out of the bag, this old man.
This guy's too funny. I do have the CBS rundown that just ran yesterday of the update, their update of the corona situation. You might want to play it.
A new case of the deadly coronavirus has been confirmed in the U.S., the latest case in Massachusetts. It's the 8th in the U.S. and the first on the East Coast. Health officials have declared a public health emergency. Nearly 14,000 people worldwide have been infected and more than 300 have died. And nearly 60 million people in China are under travel restrictions. Ramy Inocencio leading us off from Beijing.
The CDC says the new case of coronavirus is a Boston resident in his 20s who recently traveled to the center of the outbreak.
You know, just to interrupt, I'm very disappointed in light of this information that they never really say what ethnicity or background these American victims have. Because it can be American Chinese, can be American Japanese, American Korean, whatever it is, African American. We should know. They should start.
It's a blackout.
Yes.
Wuhan, China. He's been placed in isolation. Also today, tech giant Apple announced it would close all its stores and offices in China until February 9th, joining a growing list of companies restricting operations here. This all comes as the World Health Organization declared a global health emergency, and the U.S. State Department raised its travel advisory for China to the highest level, meaning do not travel to China.
A new study out by the British medical journal The Lancet estimates that more than 75,000 people have been infected by the virus as of last week. If that turns out to be true, it would confirm what many already fear, that Beijing is massively underreporting these numbers.
The CDC reported that even if patients' initial tests for coronavirus are negative, they could still develop the illness because the test only works when patients have symptoms. A study also showed the virus can be transmitted by patients with no symptoms. A woman who traveled from Shanghai to Germany infected 7 other people while she remained asymptomatic. Those findings contributed to the decision to place 195 Americans housed at a California air base in the first federal quarantine in 50 years. They will spend 14 days there.
The best way to control a virus like this is to keep people away from everyone else while you run out the clock on that incubation period.
I'm really glad you got this clip because it leads perfectly into Dr. Fauci. And Dr. Fauci is a celebrity here on the No Agenda Show. You may remember him, one of the most famous lines ever. Do you remember Fauci?
Thank you, Mr. Bluff.
Yes.
Dr. Fauci, thanks so much, as always, for joining us.
Good to be here, Brolf.
So that is Fauci. He's a fan favorite here at the No Agenda Show. And he's talking about these I think it's him, yes, talking about the 195 Americans that were flown out of Wuhan and now they're in quarantine. They're not getting out in 14 days. Listen carefully.
Clearly, they're all isolated and will be for the 14 days. We have done virus isolation, but I want to be clear, the current test that we developed at CDC is not, we're not sure of the natural history of how the virus is isolated. Can you isolate it one day, then 3 days later you can't? And we are seeing in the cases that are in the hospital, we've seen people had detectable virus, then they didn't have detectable virus, and then 3 days later they had detectable virus. We're using the virus cultures right now in these individuals, more to help us learn about this virus. How much asymptomatic carriage, in fact, is there? So I want people to understand that distinction. We're not using it as a release criteria because we don't know the natural history of how this virus is secreted, and this is what we're continuing to learn.
Not using that as release criteria. Enjoy your February. They're not getting out. This is the problem. Is you can get it and then it goes away and then it comes back.
Well, I don't think so.
That's what he just said. He just said that.
What he really said was the test sucks.
There's that. So this is from the task force, and they did have some soothing words for Merkins.
I want to stress the risk of infection for Americans remains low. And with these and our previous actions, we are working to keep the risk low. All agencies are working aggressively to monitor this continually evolving situation and to keep the public informed in a constantly transparent way. The United States appreciates China's efforts and coordination with public health officials across the globe and continues to encourage the highest levels of transparency. It is likely that we will continue to see more cases in the United States in the coming days and weeks, including some limited person-to-person transmission. The American public can be assured the full weight of the U.S. government is working to safeguard the health and safety of the American people.
Donald Trump, don't trust China. China is asshole.
My 23andMe comment is not far off from our future. You watch. If this is true and it comes down to DNA and what parts of people you're made out of, we shall see. We shall see what happens. No.
Well,
but it's still, ultimately it's not even apparently as bad as the seasonal flu. But if it comes and goes and you carry it after months, that's problematic. Or a problem, I guess.
Well, something's a problem.
So then the Department of Justice, we get some notes too. They're building a bunch. These hospitals apparently aren't really hospitals that they're building right outside in town. No, they're
just prisons.
Containers with the lock on the outside. It's a container. You can pick it right up with the crane and drop it. I think they're going to
start killing people.
So just to add some insult to injury, and this hasn't been used politically yet that I'm aware of, but the Department of Justice came out and gave a little rundown of what they've been doing most recently with people doing covert research on behalf of Chinese bio labs.
We're here today to announce 3 separate cases highlighting the ongoing threat posed by Chinese economic espionage and research theft in the United States. First, the arrest today of a Harvard University professor for lying about his participation in a Chinese foreign recruitment program. Second, this morning we have unsealed a separate indictment of a Chinese national working as a scientific researcher at Boston University who failed to mention on her visa application that she is also a lieutenant with the People's Liberation Army. Finally, this office has indicted another Chinese national for trying to smuggle vials of biological material out of the United States to China and lying about it to federal investigators. That defendant, whose entry to the United States had been sponsored by Harvard University, was a cancer researcher at a lab at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. So, this morning, the FBI arrested Dr. Charles Lieber, the chair of the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology at Harvard University, for making false statements regarding his involvement in China's Thousand Talents Plan and his affiliation with the Wuhan University of Technology. The complaint alleges that Dr. Lieber signed a contract with the Chinese university in Wuhan and was paid up to $50,000 per month, plus up to $158,000 in living expenses, and awarded more than $1.5 million to set up a research lab at the Chinese school and work there on researching nanotechnology. Lieber also joined China's Thousand Talents Plan, according to the complaint, a Chinese government-run program designed to entice scientists and researchers in the United States to share their research expertise with China.
Coincidence? I think not.
It is just one of those odd coincidences.
It's a beauty.
Just now the the Health and Human Services Secretary, Anzar, I think he's in trouble somehow with this. I mean, he's waffling and floating around the way he says stuff. And I have two clips. One from, I think this is the from their press conference, and then I think the other one may be from a direct television interview. But this is explaining self-quarantine.
Mr. Secretary, the mandatory quarantine for people coming in from Hubei province, will that be home quarantine or will that be in an institutional setting?
That would be at an appropriate quarantine facility of some kind for those individuals. For the U.S. citizens returning to the United States from having been in China within the previous 14 days, they would be funneled, as Secretary Cuccinelli spoke of. They would be screened appropriately to see if they present any type of symptoms of the disease, and then they would be asked to self-isolate at home over the 14 days. But for individuals from Hubei, because that is the epicenter of this with such high immediate transmission, we feel these additional measures of quarantine for up to 14 days are appropriate.
And could I just follow that? Have you selected specific quarantine centers?
We have selected them. We will announce those as DHS implements with the airlines that funneling activity.
Can you say it with me now? FEMA camps. FEMA camps in your future, ladies and gentlemen. And listen to Anzar. Anzar has a tell and a truth wants to come out moment in 39 seconds. We'll get the tell at the beginning, and then the truth wants to come out.
And the headline is the world ready for the coronavirus? How do you answer that question?
So, Ed, we've actually been very transparent about what we do not know yet about this virus. Which
wow.
We've actually been very transparent.
So, Ed, we've actually been very transparent about what we do not know yet about this virus, which is we don't know full information about its contagiousness, about its severity profile, which is why I'm delighted that at the invitation of the Chinese government, we will accept the invitation to participate as part of the World Health Organization's team of experts that will deploy to China to assist Chinese experts on the ground to actually get ground truth, to study this virus, get all the information to both help the spread, prevent the spread further in China of it.
This guy's
wow.
To actually get ground truth, to study this virus, get all the information to both help the spread, prevent the spread further in China of it, but also global spread of this virus.
You got the clip of the day for finding that one.
I think I deserve it in this case. Clip of the day. A double whammy.
No, that's a double. You got the tell, the cough, and you got the slip.
Got to help the spread, man. Oh, I mean, oh, my goodness.
Well, at the dinner table conversation, we were talking about some other aspects of this,
Sorry.
which includes the fact that men should be more susceptible for various reasons.
70% more men infected than women so far.
Yeah, and that has to do with the structure of the lungs and the smoking and the rest of it. But, you know, the conversation came where the Chinese have too many men anyway.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
So, because, you know, it might be, you know, to even things out a little bit.
Who knows?
It's a pretty grisly conversation, I'll tell you.
Yeah, but now we know that historically speaking, having been around the block for a bit, being a little bit older, all of these scares, Ebola, Zika, swine flu, H1N1, SARS. People die. 30,000 a year die from seasonal flu. People die. So in the United States, I don't feel we have to be that worried. Europe is also not shutting everything down now. And my goodness, they can't, of course, because everyone's. This is the real issue. It's not just China, as one of the first clips said. It was just our factory anymore. We're intertwined. So if China goes down, it's going to hurt. Just economically speaking.
Dame Astrid sent us a note discussing this in what's going on in Japan.
Yes.
You got that?
I did.
And she mentions that the Ginza is just empty. The places, the streets are deserted.
Oh, yeah. People, they don't want to eat. They want to go out. They don't want to do anything. I know.
Yeah, this really will slow down your economy. You know, bankrupt. This is not good. I mean, over just that part. you mentioned at the beginning, just not the
Economically, it's an issue.
It's not good.
Yeah, I got a note from
it's being ignored, I think, somewhat. And I should also mention this, since you started off by mentioning that the paper about the HIV being inserted into Corona somehow, which may or may not be true, I think it's bullcrap.
I do too, but
it did get by posting this, which is nothing wrong with posting the fact that this paper exists.
Yeah.
Zero Hedge got kicked off of Twitter, gone.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Very disturbing.
That's not suspicious. Our Intel Analyst, this is the one who caught the fact that a lot of the Canadians flying back from Iran were actually came from the university in Scandinavia, where they're experts in nuclear technology. So he sent me sent me a follow-up note. Here's some facts regarding the virus. He said he got this. So he's an intelligence analyst, so he gets his information from sources. So he says a well-placed source with direct ties to mainland China. I know it sounds a bit like a weird blog post, but it was private to me, and he has some standing in the show since this previous observation. So he attends his source attends Johns Hopkins University in Nanjing, China. Or attended, and as an alum, he still has a log on to their libraries where he drew some research from. So the short version of what our analyst has found out, the most susceptible to the nCoV, the novel coronavirus, the highest ACE2 gene structures, people who contract never recover from it. The virus becomes recessive after incubation and initial flare. Many of those who had an initial infection with fever and cough, but without cytokine storm. What is that, John? What's the word? Cytokine storm? CYTO.
I don't know. There's a word I'd have to look at. Is this okay?
Well, it's
I'll spell it.
CYTOKINE. Cytokine?
Cytokine, I think.
Cytokine. So without cytokine storm, if you look that up for me, had showed a compromised immune system and recurrence of the virus. In several cases, the third or fourth recurrence in the reduced immune response, there's that word again, cytokine storm developed. Those people died. Because the virus is immunocompromising, any recurrences... Yes?
Stop you. A cytokine storm is an overproduction of immune cells.
Ah, yes.
And then activating compound cytokines, which in a flu infection is often associated with a surge of activated immune cells into the lungs.
So you kill yourself by your body tries to protect yourself.
This is like some people you can almost self-induce an asthma attack, but then there's certain things that get released, histamines, and then the next thing you know, you're half dead.
Because the virus is immunocompromising, any recurrences further weakens the immune system. The Chinese are using the term airborne AIDS in describing the approach to it. The patient in Seattle was given an experimental antiretroviral after his first post-infection flare, fully recovered on the drug. He was declared cured. When he stopped the drug, the virus flare recurred. This is from the New York Times January 22nd article. He's back in the hospital. The basic prevention is to quarantine and avoid people in the ACE2 gene sequence. Those people will have the highest viral load and be super spreaders. Yes, this is much less deadly currently than the flu virus. However, it has the potential to grow undetected at a much higher rate. It has also had an impact on the global economy that has already surpassed anything flu virus has ever done, according to our intelligence analyst. So the ACE2 gene sequence, is that something you can get from 23andMe? Can we figure that out? Can we target people now who have done this?
I think this, again, is the Han Chinese.
Probably. No, he has the list. It's the same list that Buzzkill Jr. probably saw with most susceptible, where Americans comes down at, the halfway down the list, 50%. So that
lower.
Kind of sounds a bit like something that might have been bioengineered. Who knows?
Well, these things, naturally occurring substances do evolve.
Do that too, yeah.
On their own, and then you just happen to be the unlucky winner.
And you're a winner, and you're a winner.
I got myself a case of Wuhan Virus. I don't know what I am supposed to do. Didn't know I had it when I gave it to you. Now we all got the
Well, the point that if you can't get rid of it once you get it, you're forever.
It's more like herpes.
Yeah, sounds like a lot like herpes. You can't get rid of it.
Oh man.
Huh. Well, that's all bad news.
It's not great.
I still think the real bad news is yet to come. It's interesting. The economy will coast for a while.
Oh, it's got to be hurting. It has to. The numbers have to make it.
No, it's going to be huge.
Thank you.
It's going to be.
And
just
this is
before
what
the
I
election.
said. And everyone's going to start using this. Hey, if we had a public company, we'd be having this meeting right now. Hey, we still have that, that shit on the balance sheet. Why don't we get the bad news out, blame it on Chinese flu or whatever, say, your sales, something problem.
Well,
supply
that's
chain.
A common effect. Yeah, if it's bad weather, you blame it on whatever's going on.
Of course.
But it's going to definitely have an effect. And whether or not the market accepts the blame, and because the market will go, well, okay, we'll let you slide on this one.
Yeah.
But if it continues, and if this is like what that Johns Hopkins report and that intelligence guy, which I believe him because
me too.
Johns Hopkins is a spook operation.
You think
at this point?
Yes.
And they would have good information.
Yeah.
And so if he's looking at their stuff and they get this doesn't go out to the newspapers, this kind of thing. They don't want to freak out the public.
No. This is just for podcasts. That's just so the Intel guys can sit around and laugh.
The way the dinner conversation opened up, we started talking about it. It went like this. Oh, Adam read a note from one of our producers talking about this big programming operation, and all the programmers are staying away from the Chinese. You remember that note?
Yes.
They're all huddling anywhere, but they don't want to be hanging out with the Chinese coders. And JC starts off by saying, for good reason.
Yeah.
Great.